Greetings, it is I, Pathinder of Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome! We're talking tabletop today, and we're talking more Pathfinder, more Golarion, and I'm introducing you to one of the oldest human nations in existence in current Golarion as it is, Osirion. What does that mean? It is an ancient civilization, or an ancient country that has an ancient civilization based in it. Think of it very similar to our modern-day Egypt, except they did have a period where they were conquered, but maintained a lot of that like ancient Egyptian culture rather than adapting to the cultures. Egyptian culture, as it is now, is a amalgamation of all the various cultures that came into existence through its various conquerors. And certainly the more modern version of Egypt doesn't really look like ancient Egypt. And Osirion has some similarities to that, but they managed to maintain a very strong connection to their ancient ancestry over the thousands of years that they were conquered. And they were really only conquered one time, which made a difference between, let's say, ancient Egypt, which was conquered by Greeks, Alexander the Great, the people of like various empires from the Middle East and kind of things like that. They were conquered a lot over the years. A lot of people took over Egypt, but there was a lot of tumultuous things in that territory, so it made sense. A lot of hands changed and stuff like that. Happened a lot like that kind of stuff in a lot of places in Europe too, but we don't recognize the same way as it because, you know, Europe has its own different timelines. Anyway, let's not talk about that. We're going to talk about the Osirians. So let me throw myself over into the chatting corner for now. Yeah, I know, that was a really cool thing too, that they would do archaeology on their own ancient past. That's one of those interesting things about it. I mean, the Osirians probably did something similar to that because they had a very ancient culture. I'm going to throw up for our main thing here. That should be correct. There we go. Here is a map of Osirion. Here is going to be our big background thing. There's a PDF I have. I'm going to overlay this with other images taken from the internet. So, to describe where we are coming from today, I will show off some images that we are going to start with. Let us see this image here. This is the first image we'll take a look at. Over top of this, this is the Osirion capital with its giant bug carcass, which we'll talk about, which is really neat, which is the big hallmark image of Osirion. Let's take a look at the books that I'll be going over and where my sources are today. I want to discuss this. There's, of course, the Lost Kingdoms book. There is the Osirion Land of the Pharaohs, which, fun fact, is a 3.5 book. This is called Pathfinder Companion. This is when Paizo was still publishing Pathfinder stuff under 3.5. This book came out. And then finally, this one here, the Pathfinder campaign setting, Osirion Legacy of Pharaohs, which is probably the book I'll be using the most out of these books here, combined with the Pathfinder wiki page. The Pathfinder wiki page honestly summarizes a lot of the stuff in the Lost King books a lot better. This book here is a lot more useful for material from the actual geography, what's going on in the country and stuff like that. So that is why the difference is between them. I will be adding some stuff in from the Lost Kings books when we talk about the history of it, though. So those are the books and sources I'll be using today if you want to follow along at home. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often with sources so that you can follow too. Even the middle book here, the Osirion Land of the Pharaohs, does have some decent things to it that I would claim you could check out. Lost Kingdoms are just about more the ancient Osirians, which again, ancient Osirians are technically gone. The modern day version of Osirians are just derived from them a lot more directly than our modern day Egyptians are derived from ancient Egyptians. They have a lot more of that flavor in them, though they technically can be considered like an independent country, not an independent country, a country for all this time period. The ancient Osirians never fell as a country. They were conquered and basically under a person, but they were, I'll explain, they were still like their own a puppet state, I will say, for thousands of years. That's effectively what they were. So the country still existed, it just was a puppet state of a greater empire. Think about Rome. basically they got roamed for a long period of time. And then when that country, basically the more modern era of Golarion, fell apart a little bit, they got independence. So they've had independence again for like 100 years. Not long. Not long at all. But those are the books there, and that was a nice page there. And we'll show off this little thing here if you want to see it. This is the symbol of Osirion. So this is like, if you're ever looking for something that represented, it's the big old scarab and the sun and ass and cobras, stuff like that. But let's talk about Osirion. So as I mentioned, it is one of the oldest human nations in the Inner Sea region. One of the most powerful, influential since the Earthfall. Remember Earthfall, a good time, giant like meteor was going to destroy the world, broke apart, still caused destruction and damage across the world. Yeah, good times, good times. Well, not good times. It was an end of a world kind of thing. So, let's talk about the rise of ancient Osirion. So Earthfall happened about 5,293 AR. So that's, and considering that the modern time, I'm just going to note for you to know, is around, I believe, I can give you the exact date of it here. Give me a second. That is not the right person to click on to get the date. You took office. I think it's 4723 would be the current year. I believe. I would have to honestly confirm that with the timeline. Yes. Effectively, our current year, 2023, take that 23 and add 47 onto the end of it. So, it has been over, well, nearly 10,000 years since the, basically, Earthfall. Since the major civilizations, which had technology and magic to a degree which could be considered maybe even equivalent to our own, were destroyed. And the original Osirion country was founded around 3470. So this is like nearly 2,000 years later, this first civilization actually came about. It took that long for the world to recover from Earthfall. It was that cataclysmic. That took like 2,000 years. So, here we meet our first character, who I don't have an image of, but I can describe him and show you off an image here that you might want to check out. And he's a prophet of Nethys, a deity. So that's the holy symbol of Nethys there. Just checking that out there for you to see. And of course, Nethys is a Gurundi god, Gurundi being the continent that Osirion is in the northeastern corner of. It's the continent that they're on. He holds magic above all things. He transpires all that goes between faiths. He's got a kind of divinity, but he's very neutral. So, known as the All-Seeing Eye, it's a neutral deity of magic. And it's a very dual-natured magic, like, you know, kind of like the creation and destruction that magic can cause is his dual nature. Anyway, this original person that we came across was known as, I'm going to butcher this, Azghad. Azghaad. Azghad. He was the first pharaoh of Osirion. The entire thing that happened was he managed to unify the tribes along the Sphinx River, which is one of the major rivers in Osirion, and establish the capital at Sothis. Sothis is still the capital of Osirion. The picture I showed you earlier, that's Sothis, the big old thing there. From then on, they would be the Pharaohs of Osirion, the god kings of Osirion. So, there is evidence of what happened here in the giant shell of a monstrosity there. So, I've talked a little bit about before, we'll talk about it again here. good old Rovagug, basically the destroyer of existence deity, is sealed in the center of Golarion. I've mentioned this a couple times before in other videos about World, but I'll mention it again. Powerful, evil, super deity that, you know, all the other deities opposed, sealed within Golarion to prevent the end of all things. Got spawned, horrible monstrosities that sends out to basically be its heralds. There was one called Olirant. Good old Olirant. Well, Olirant showed up, and Ozikad, with Nethys' help, defeated Olirant. And you know what they did with it? Built the city around its shell. Let's show that one off there. I can show that off at a distance here. That's the big city. It's a hard one to zoom into. But you can see there's a big shell in the middle of the city. Yeah, that was the giant monstrosity beast in the center of the city, which was slain. It was like the four-winged beetle that was on the Osirion symbol is supposed to be a stylized and kind of toned-down version of this thing. This is known as the Black Dome. It is the center point of the capital. The palace is in the center of it. I'll show you off the palace here. That is the palace in Sothis underneath the shell. This is a really cool setup for it, that, like, the actual first pharaoh of this empire got on good terms with the god, slayed a horrible monstrosity, and basically then turned its shell into the center point for rule of an ancient empire. Pretty cool. And you can see that, I think on this map here, you can see that Sothis was on one border here. Sothis is towards the, kind of, I would compare it like similar to where Cairo is, I think. It's on the kind of mouth of the Sphinx River there. So it's kind of close to the coast. So yeah. So the Carapace has remained for nearly, 8,000 years. That's been there. Technically speaking, no one knows this, but I will mention this because it is a fact, and we're not talking about secrets here. We're talking about things. It's technically not dead because they're really hard to kill. Merely its spiritual form has basically been sealed away in a pocket dimension deep beneath the carcass. People have tried to free it. The Osirians not only murder the crap out of these people, but make them totally disappear so no one knows about its existence. But should it ever awaken, basically everybody in the metropolis of Sothis is there to basically try to hold it off. So that's a thing. It was a three-eyed, four-winged, 10 limbs tipped with blades, macular carapace, great single horn that absorbed arcane energy and reflected it back at the caster. Yeah, no, it was kind of horrible. And this dude, honestly kicked its ass with the help of a god. And they sealed away its spiritual form and left its corpse to be a mark of its defeat. The Black Dome, with the Palace of the Fourth Bringer, which is the one I showed there, is basically in there. It's the Royal Palace, and there's also many, nobles. Oh, basically, if you are a noble in the city, and if you get real estate in there, you're the top noble of the city. Usually that's kind of like, if a family dies out, you have to be the first one to buy it up, or you have to have inherited it from a family or something like that. Big thing on there. That's the place you want to be. So yeah. And it's decorated with magical fairy fire constellations on the inside. So it does that. But a lot of major buildings are also in here. Just to mention the dome while we're here, because we'll get back to the city of Sothis. The main city council, basically an ancient exhibitory, probably of history, an oratory, and a magical druid grove are here. And to the public, there are people that can visit the public from the public on the inside, almost kind of touristy. Only 100 people a day, though. It's an interesting little known thing. But it's very interesting there that it's not. First 100 get inside. Anyway, so we've established our area here, and now that the thing has been defeated, our good friend here, our Pharaoh, Agazad, basically claims lead to a vast area of land, and it stretches from to Kapadash to Rahadum, which I probably have to show you a Garundi map here, which I didn't actually get ready. I can probably get that ready pretty quickly. Yeah, my nose a little bit. But basically, they controlled the northern coast of a lot of that territory there. I can actually go to the Lost Kingdoms book, and I think we can take a look at this. They have a map of it under the Lost Kingdoms. There we go. Let me switch over to the Lost Kingdoms book for a second. There you go. So, as you can see, using my, I don't think you see my arrow here, but on the northeastern corner here is where Osirion is nowadays, which I showed you that map before. Very small. This was the extent of ancient Osirion, kind of like that was its height, its largest area, around negative 1,400 AR. That was when it's its biggest, but that was the entire area the country spread from that corner there. So they had a wide swath of territory that they we'll go back to that. But you can see now it's just a small area, but you can see that it is still a big chunk of that territory is left over, that they have left in the entire thing. Sorry, blow my nose. I should really mute it for that. I keep forgetting. I talked about that in other videos, so I should mute it for that. So, we have the founding of Osirion. As I said, Lost Kingdom books. Pretty good place of history. But I do also, suggest if you really want to look into some things there. We'll talk about Osirion today. We'll skip that for a second. Anyway, so a massive temple of Nethos constructed around there, about negative 3,399 AR. And it begins the first age of Osirion. That was the basically first period of Osirian history, where there was a huge amount of pharaohs. And the thing we think about here is it isn't just one dynasty. The Osirian pharaohs are from a number of different dynasties, basically family lines. Are they all possibly related? Yeah, maybe, like a distant cousin when someone dies. There are some gaps in knowledge. The Pathfinder wiki does a really great job showing off a whole lot of these pharaohs and their names, and some of them are just named. We don't know a lot about them. There isn't information from any books about them, except more than their name, and they're built up in their time. But this was basically the original age. Now, the second ruler is someone to be mentioned because they are what kind of hits on a trend of what happens with pharaohs, because the Osirian kingdom starts out all well and good, but has some issues. The Naga pharaoh, which came into rule on negative 3412, before the temple was completed, this lady's name lost to time, but she was also kind of this chosen of Nethys. The problem with Nethys is, remember, he's the god of magic that deals with the duality of creation and destruction. She got a lot of destructive, in her brain, in the form of dream visions, which drove her into kind of a slight madness, which, the temple that just got built, it kind of got burned down really early on. So a lot of things happened. There was a lot of these god kings in charge, all the pharaohs. And the Osirian civilization basically built out of nothing. Earthfall had destroyed everything, returning from the tribal barbarism that a lot of people had been, and both human and other ancestries had been driven to. Bringing themselves back out of that darkness was a thing that they needed. they became a source of culture and military in this area. There may have been other smaller nations in there that were assimilated, or ones that, maybe lost to time that had influence on them. There's rumors from certain things that maybe the Dark Tapestry, aka very Cthulhuian stuff and very Lovecraftian stuff, kind of had an influence. Their main rival at the time was the Justka Imperium. It was in northern Garun too. They were the source of Justka's decline and eventual destruction. All its trade partners found Osirion a much better trade partner, and they also Osirion also allied with the warlike desert nomads of the Takarian League, and then around negative 2764, the Justka Imperium collapsed, and Osirion was basically what was left. So we get to then around negative 1452, where anything that was left over from like the Takarian League, they kind of also broke that power and became the height of the power. The Osirion height of power was, though, nowhere near that time. Unfortunately, the Osirion height of power was, in fact, negative 3000. So that's actually only about 500 years after it was formed. And you can see that then they had a very sharp rise to power and then a very slow decline. So ancient Osirion, this version of their kingdom, controlled what would be modern day Golarion versions of Rahudum, Thuvia, Kapesh, Neb, and Gex. All of those becoming their own countries much later on, which various times and ages fell to them. They broke apart, kind of a lot of things like that. Of note, the only pharaoh I want to note from during this time period, because, hey, there's a bunch of pharaohs we can talk about during this time, is an important one to one of the adventure paths. Yes, that's right. If you too want to deal with some of these things, the Mummy's Mask adventure path deals with the return of one of these pharaohs, Hakotep the First. He built the slave trenches of Hakotep. Those don't sound great. I'm not going to talk about them right now, but just the name of that. He was the son of Pharaoh Djerict the First. I'm going to butcher all these names. He rose to power in negative 1653. Note that negative 1653 is very close to a time period we're going to talk about, which is negative 1498. Why? Because that's when the official second age of Osirion began. So he's right at the end of the first age of the Osirion kingdom. He had some conflicts and stuff, eventually died. Things happened to him. Became a mummy lord, I can show off a picture of him. I have a picture of him. I have a picture of him to show off. There you go. There's this nice man in all his undead wonders in there. So yeah. He took Naferset as his first royal wife. They were basically advised against her because she had become an oracle of the Dark Tapestry. So, and then he took no other wife during his reign. So, that Dark Tapestry stuff at least came in towards the back end there when he took a queen who was an oracle of the Dark Tapestry. Yeah, and she did commit suicide and was mummified with her husband, and I think rose up with him during his return later on. Stuff like that. Good old days. And they had some different during his reign. Here's another thing that marked the first decline of Osirion: troubles with their neighbors. Shori, which was a country in the area, was a big trouble for Osirion, and of course, Hakotep's reign during this time period. He did develop the Great Flying Pyramid. It's a magical kingdom. He has a magical pyramid. And 16 smaller pyramids he trusted to his generals. So that's why he's known as the Sky Pharaoh. So he is an important marker in the time period here, though, as he does have technically a successor, the last pharaoh of that bloodline. As far as we can tell, there is a gap in knowledge. There's Djetoret II, who, named after, Hakotep's father, who went after Hakotep. After him, we don't know what happens. But that's when we get to the second age of Osirion kingdom, or the age of the Black Sphinx. The decline at this point in time was halted by the ascension of the four Pharaohs of the Ascension, the advent of the four Pharaohs of the Ascension. They're basically four powerful leaders. They went into a magical pact in negative 1498 AR, and these were four dynasties that combined together. I can show off one of them. I think if I just do that. There's one of the Pharaohs of the Ascension. That's Akhenaten, the Radiant Pharaoh. I'll talk about her in a second. But they only had a very small rule until negative 1431, where their rule ended. Let's talk about them a little bit, because they're an interesting group to talk about, the Pharaohs of Ascension. They're basically these four main dynasties that were left over for the First Age came together. These were basically remnants of four houses of the various pharaohs' bloodlines that kind of had broken down, and them coming together allowed for this kind of rebirth of the Osirion kingdom. The bad news is, unfortunately, when they went away, the decline came again. They were able to, though, bring about some technological and magical advancement, some military conquests. Because they were magically bonded together, they had some distrust, though, but that kept them from battling with each other. And because, again, should one die, they would all die, was one of those things. They ruled from the lost city of Thuman. So they moved the capital kind of for them. Again, they had this pact that put them together when they all died at once. Just to mention them all, and a little bit about them. Those are interesting to hear about. There was the Fiend Pharaoh. I'm going to continue to butcher these. Hatshepsut, who was behind the military victories of the Pharaohs of Ascension, and he was a devil binder. He was known to be, and had a codex with the true names of a number of devils and demons. In fact, the Radiant Pharaoh, who's shown here, was a conjurer of significant power and beauty. She would, in fact, God, none of these people are really nice, though. Some hieroglyphs in the Veilstone Pyramid that she would force her closest servants to swallow eggs of fiendish insects procured from hell. The insects would hatch to devour the servants from the inside. If you manage to show your loyalty and favor Curry, she would basically get rid of the hatchling from inside you, so it would finish not eating you from the inside out. So, yeah. They were not nice people. The Cerulean Pharaoh, Ankok Pharaoh, basically was the one who came from the most humble beginnings, had a soft spot for orphans, basically the nicest one out of them. Had a blue dragon age, raised from a halfling, and was his favorite cohort. And then also had the dragon mummified to protect him in death, which was kind of terrible too, as his death came about. So, the pyramid also has a tale from this one that he Anger when the poor the poor production of his tax collector turned into 1,000 blue spakes and devoured his failed servitors before finally transforming back. Anyway, and the Pharaoh of Numbers, whose name is unknown, was an astronomer, an architect, numerologist, specialized in sacred geometry. We won't get into that entire horrible thing. And studied the planet of Actum. So they were an interesting group of people to talk about. But the Second Age was what came next. And the Second Age, honestly, lasted a very long period of time. It was during this time with a lot of the fall and the abrupt end of the Rule of Four that came in negative 1431. So during this time period, they lost Gex and Neb, or Geb and Nex. Those two went independent. And then to devastate each other in war. Kapatesh disappeared out of the history of this country until about 2200 AR. Thuvia, who they had control of, the governor was assassinated in negative 841. That basically took Osirians as a excuse to not replace him and basically let them go on their own. And they basically fell apart as a nation and went into basically tribal barbarism and murder of each other and battle and inter-bet war. The country was abandoned and just literally fell apart into nothing. So then we get out of the Age of Destiny, which I have to note, this is all during the Age of Destiny, which is one of the major historical ages during the Golarion world. I'll probably have to do a general world history as one of these days. I will actually have to note that world history. That's actually probably a good one to do one of these days as a thing to, go over. World history. Golarion. Cool. But this was kind of the end of the Age of Destiny, and we get into the Age of Enthronement, which is the next age. It was a very quiet passing for here, and this was a time period when Taldor and Kelish were forming powerful nations. Kelish having a very powerful hold in the Inner Sea region, when they got Quaidra, which I think I talked about when I talked about the nations over there. That it is in Casmaron when I talked about the Golarion world. And this is the Paladish Empire of Kelish forming. So, basically, AR0 passes, 1,500 years go by, not a lot is going on. I'm going to mute my nose now for once. I'm going to mute it when I... That was a very loud one. I'm glad I muted it. Anyway, the Pharaoh dynasties continued, the decline continued, and everything kind of comes to a head with Pharaoh Mendes the 26th, which is the last pharaoh in the Mendes dynasty, and the technical last age of the Age of Black Sphinxes. This was the end of it. This was the end of that entire set of the timeline. Basically, at this point in time, agents from Quaidra... Remember, we talked about how Quaidra had been taken over by Kelish, and the Kelishites saw complacency and a weakness in the Osirians. They had been losing a lot of strength over all this time. So these Quaidrian people infiltrated the civil service, basically had a series of slave revolts, and the state kind of couldn't deal with the crisis. Mendes, the 26th, went into hiding, and then in 1532, Kelish basically staged a rescue and invaded, and Osirion became a client state. of the Paladish Empire. And they put a Kelladite satrap loyal to the Emperor in charge of it. So the Kelladite satrapy of Osirion was formed in 1532. Kelladaites migrated to Osirion. Many old monuments were destroyed. And the worst of Sarenrae was introduced. All these things were basically to crush the Osirian resistance, to kind of make them complicit. The Osirians honestly gave no shits about the first two things. The Kelladaites, whatever. Destroying our old monuments, we'll build more of them. They liked Sarenrae, it turns out. Which resulted in... Oh, I should have switched this image. There's good old... This image here, which is a holy symbol of Sarenrae, but not just anyone. It's the symbol of the Cult of the Dawnflower. The militant sect of these worship of Sarenrae. They're a military religious sect. So, yeah. It was their establishment that caused some issues within the rule there. The Straps were very nervous about them because this was an Osirian-led militant cult that was religious of a religion they introduced. And it's sort of like, In 2271, the Strap at the time executed or exiled the cult's leader to the Thuvian Desert. There was a splinter in the group. Some went to Capash and stuff like that. But in 2353, a Strap was found dead on his own in one of his own fountains with sunflowers spouting from his mouth. So after that, the cult was left to come back from exile, though, some of them had splintered off into other areas, and, yeah. And it was sort of during this time period, that, the Kelladite satraps, the Osirians were basically ruled by the Kelladite sultans as kind of independent of the empire. So things changed in the dynamic of it. And this lasted for quite a while. It was 1532 AR that they were conquered. The Age of Enthronement basically continued. Osirian nationalism kind of simmered beneath the surface. They didn't really have a leader, and then the Age of Lost Omens occurred, the current age, and in 4609, a Osirian cleric of Abadar named Kemet, who could trace his lineage back to one of those early dynasties before the Pharaohs of Ascension, basically the first age of Osirian. He was able to trace, I got some ancestors back then. Granted, my family fell off the block, but I can trace myself back, and I'm a powerful cleric. He also was able to get the elementals of the desert on his side, and he basically became the new pharaoh of Osirion with a almost bloodless coup. Since then, there have been two rulers, Kemet II, who kind of sucked, and the current ruler of Osirion, Kemet III, which we can show off a nice picture of this man here. Good old Kemet III. So we'll kind of move away from Kemet III here for a moment. But that's the history of, of Osirion. So, again, we have this rebirth of Osirian dominance effectively at 4609, which is like 100 years ago. And Osirion has been a free country again, rather than being so they were semi-independent, kind of on their own. They were kind of conquered. They weren't assimilated into this other country, into Kelesh. But, a man here was able to basically come in. And the thing is also, this is 3 years after the death of Eredin, a major deity that actually died in 4606. So there was a bit of big destabilization across the world with this, and specifically a lot of destabilization of the country here. The Sultan and her family of the time fled the country. That's why it was a nearly bloodless coup. And of course the Church of Sarenrae is still recognized in the Cult of the Dawnflower because they were instrumental in the rise to power of this new one. Here. There was one thing that did happen here. The current the Empress of Kelish at the time, Empress Rashana the 27th, again, butchering these names, basically allowed for this and recognized Kemet I's rule in exchange for all those Kelishites that were in the country to be allowed citizenship and avoid retaliation. He agreed. So that's the thing is, remember, a bunch of Kelishites moved in, and effectively, any ones that had been there for generations. Remember, they ruled for over 3,000 years there. So there could have been Kelishite people that had family that dealt back 3,000 years. That's a long time. So when you're ethnically Kelish more than Osirion, there could be some backlash now that it's independence. And the idea that we are all children of the Osirian nation was something that helped it come together. And of course, this is when Sothis became the capital again. Remember, it had been moved out along. And that's when the new palace was constructed in the big old thing. And used some old stuff that was in the area. And, there you go. We will talk about the current pharaoh in a little bit, though, when we kind of move on to the country as it is. Which we should probably do now. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything in the Lost Kingdoms book, Osirion Today. We don't have to worry about because that's all just stuff. And I went over most of this history. Great. So that's the basic histories of our good old friend here, ancient Osirion into modern day Osirion. The country's technically existed the entire time. You can kind of say that. Now, as I said, I did use the Land of the Pharaohs book here, which I could kind of go into some details here, but a lot of this is not going to be helpful for our discussion here, as they do a better job of it in the Legacy of Pharaohs. They do go over some things about locations within Osirion. So if you want to look up a lot more of these locations and stuff here, which I will talk about some of these locations when I go into the other book, it also gives a lot of information on some of these other places, different information, some other areas that I don't think are in the other book. It's a place to check it out if you are interested. So I will suggest that. Again, it's a 3.5 book. But let's talk about Osirion today a little bit. So, the Ruby Prince Kemet III is the ruler. It's a celestial monarchy is what it's called because, again, it's the idea that they are god kings. They are empowered by the original blessings of the deity. God, my brain just here for a second. Nethys. And that has had a result on it. We can talk about the government and geography in a minute, but I will talk about the people first. So, if you're looking to those that are in the nation, there are two bloodlines that are here. Old Grundy blood, which is the Osirians, who are a very bronze-skinned people. And then, of course, you also have a nomadic offshoot of the Grundy, the Yeberai in the Western Desert there. But you also have a good number of people of the Kelish descent, or the Kemite descent. Yes. A lot of names. Kelish descent. I said it right. My brain just told me it was wrong. And the thing is, there's been a lot of trouble in the planet. There's the ebbs and flows of political power, and they are a very old nation. So why they are not involved in the larger what's going on in the inner sea as much, they are a nation that's more respected. So let's talk a little about religion here, because this is going to paint a picture for when I talk about the government and the geography of the place too, and a little bit of the magic too. So the most common religions right now are Abadar, of course. The first new pharaoh was a cleric of Abadar. Nethys makes sense. The deity which initially empowered all there. Pharasma, of course, Pharasma is the neutral goddess of death. Everybody worships her. And the other major gods of Osirion. What does that mean? We'll talk about it. There are some unique faiths, though, that are also here, which we can bring up an image of one of the deities of that unique faiths. There's Wadjet, who has some huge practice. The twin serpent cults of Wadjet and Epep. And, of course, then the dung beetle Keperdi as a cult for peasants, which that is... Keperdi is the one in the back there, if you wanted to see that in there, of those. But yes, the Osirion Pantheon, which is going to look incredibly similar to some stuff that we know about, because the answer is yes. Remember, I've talked about this in my Golarion video. Golarion is connected to Earth. So guess what? The animal-headed deities that we know from the Egyptian deities are the exact same ones that were there for the Osirians. So, their worship was the most powerful during the earlier days, but foreign deities and these more major deities of Golarion have taken over. During the age of enthronement, the Osirian gods have continued to guide Osirion from afar, but they technically retreated from Golarion and turned their attention towards the distant lands of Kemet, which is a fancy name for Egypt in the planet of Earth. Ancient Egypt sometimes referred to the old kingdom of Kemet. And it was a favorite of the Osirian Pantheon after they retreated from Osirion, ancient Osirion. And I will tell you, 4715 is the Earth year 1920. So though the year is the same, it is 4723 now on Golarion. If we want to know the date that they go by, that's technically not true. Because it's not 2023, we compare it. No. 4723 is 1928. So that tells you, if we're looking at the books that come out, they're on 4723. Any book with an adventure coming out in 2023 takes place in 4723. That's how you... any book that comes out this year will be 4723, etc., etc., etc. That's how you kind of tell the date. But to know where it is in Earth terms, if you were to travel from Golarion to Earth, it's 2028 now. That's a neat little fact that you can figure out. Anyway, the deities still exist in the faith, and of course, a lot of these are familiar. Anubis, Apep, Beset, Bes, Hathor, Horus, Isis, Khepri, Mot, Nath, Nethius, which is one that actually is still majorly worshipped as I mentioned, or maybe that's not the right one. Nephriathis, Osiris, Ptah, Ra, Sekhmet, Selket, Set, Sobek, Thoth, and Wadjet. All of these are the main ancient Osirian deities. Again, they lost a lot during it, but there is modern worship does still exist. So, hey, they're still technically around, and especially with the Osirian rule being rekindled in 4609, many of these ancient deities have become even more popular again, because it's sort of like Osirians want to rekindle their old religion. It's sort of like, we still like these new people, but we have interest in these people that our ancestors worshipped. We want to have them back in our lives. So, Yep. It is a complex thing that, you know, helps come across it. The other thing to mention is there is some unique magic to Osirians. They have a special type of meta magic called Thanatopic spells, which can pierce wards against negative energy, have effects to destroy undead, and a Threnoditic spell, which can make a mind-controlling spell affect undead, which normally they're immune to. So those are some very unique manipulation spells, and of course, the most infamous of their tomes of necromancy is the Alakamtum, the Book of the Dead. Where did I get an image of that? I didn't get that. Nope. It's 2024 Papyrus Scrolls, basically ultimate necromancy scrolls for them. It's a lot of stuff about things and got some interesting content. In various different levels. Anyway. And there are some spells that are uncommon in other parts of the world that are familiar to Osirian magicians, including Bone Shatter, Coptic Conversion, Sands of Time, Spectral, Soliloquy, and Tomb Legion. So if you're from Osirion, if you're Osirian by descent or from one of the cities of Osirion, you would know those spells and they'd be common to you, otherwise uncommon everywhere else. Let's talk the government. Because there's some stuff to talk about with those Osirians that we have to get into with its government. So let's bring up our good friend here. We'll bring him back. Our very, very good friend here. Oh, I closed his tab with his image. There we go. We're bringing back good old Kemet III. Hi, Kemet. Welcome back. So, Kemet here. He is about middle-aged. He has a youthful appearance because he drank the Sun Orchid Elixir, which is not technically an elixir of life. It halts the aging process. People can get it. It's expensive. It's powerful. It's a minor artifact. We're not getting into that existence, but, you know, he does cultivate the image of being kind of weak and meek of his youthful, his youth appearance kind of inspires. He cultivates that. He has brought about a lot of new radical policies for the Osirians. The major one of, which we will talk about here, led to the Mummy's Mask adventure path. He basically opened up many of the ancient tombs of Osirians to explorers from the Inner Sea region. Why did he do that? He basically opened up adventurers to loot his open people. Because the idea was they would sell anything they recovered on the local markets, because making immediate profit would be more valuable than sending it away. And that was actually true. You know, effectively he's like, hey, people of my nation, I'm sending these people in here to take all the risk and giving these things against, you know, undead defenders and mummies and all that kind of stuff. When they come back, rather than haul all this stuff to somewhere else, they sold it right there. A lot of money happened there. But then in 47-14, Hakatup I came back and, you know, he reverted the policy. So it was only there for 7 years. Tomb robbing went underground. All right. Oh, boy. Oh. He has been having a military buildup. He has a number of powerful advisors. I'll talk about some of them. He has 2 unusual, wondrous items that make motorcycle. That are like marks of his set of the royal family. He's protected by the Risen Guard, who are basically a special group of elite military within the military of Osirion that are basically the personal guard of the ruler. I'll show them off here for a second. Those are the Risen Guard. They're a very neat look to them. And of course they are leaded over by a powerful commander, Kaposhman of Sothis. It's the name and title of the leader of both the City Watch of Osirion's capital and the Risen Guard. So I will show off that dude there. Ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doom. Yep. So, this guy's job here, both being part of the leader of the Risen Guard, basically the elite unit guarding over the Ruby Prince, leader of the country, but also is in charge of the defense of the city of Sothis. So a lot of big roles there for the man. We'll go back to Command here as we talk more about the nation. Okay. So, Comet is a very powerful summoner. He summons a lot of elementals and genies, angelic and fiendish servants of the gods. There's worries that those desert elementals that his grandfather got into, he's entangling a little bit too much for them for the, stuff. But the biggest thing is the laws of equitable use that we have to talk about, because they are a thing. Why don't we talk about those in a minute? Let's talk about the rest of the government for a second here. So, though we have Comet III, the Ruby Prince being kind of like the one who's technically in charge of the entire country, under him, though, there is a advisory council called the Council of Sun and Sky. These are 100-person legislative composed of wealthy merchants, important members of the clergy, minor nobles, and other individuals that are either in the good graces of the Ruby Prince or one of the governors that oversees the nation's many regions. Okay? Great. So, each one represents one of the major cities and handles the day-to-day affairs of the national government. Foreign trade agreements, financial policy, funds for armed forces, maintaining ports, streets, river locks. That's what they do. Regional matters are usually left to the governors, for things like that. It was established in 4610 that the council would meet in chambers beneath the Black Dome. And so that was kind of where, Comet the First could kind of have an ear of the council and stuff and, hear what's going on if he wanted to be involved in the agenda. The Pharaoh does have the power to revoke anybody from being on the council. The thing is, so far, and for how it's been established, the Pharaoh really can't do that unless the person is enriching themselves excessively at the nation's expense. Basically, can technically fire them anytime, but that's on the surface. The way it really is supposed to work is if someone is abusing the power. So 5 members here are elected to serve on a council of the lower ranks. And the second desperate body, the Council of Liberated Slaves. Here's where we get into some of the things about Osirians. Alright, so we have to think back here. Think back a very important thing. Very similar to our ancient Egypt, what did they build all of their great monuments in Osirion? The backs of slaves. It's just like ancient Egypt was, built on the backs of slaves back in those days. And even in the modern-day Golarion, there are a few slaving nations left. Most nations have gone away from that. Osirion isn't quite away from there. So what is the Council of Liberated Slaves? It's a 63-person council composed entirely of former slaves and children of slaves, and they are in charge of the well-being of Osirian slave population. They also tend to advocate for the nation's freeborn poor as well. Remember, 5 members of the Sun and Sky Council are elected to serve on this council too. This has kind of been a compromise in the modern world because, again, ancient Osirians, and for the longest times, a lot of nations kind of have been a very slave nations. Other slave nations are Chelix and Capetish, are the 2 other big slaving nations that still exist now. So this is like a cultural counterstone that's still in here, unfortunately, in their nation. Again, it's not so common anymore. It has been going away as a practice. It still exists, though. And basically, the founding of the state of Aradin in 4669 and its declaration of the common rule that slavery be abolished everywhere was something that changed that. So slavery stopped existing on Golarion in a way, not completely, but in a lot of regions in the world only about 50 years ago. That's when a lot of it disappeared. That's why, in a lot of places, it still exists. Remember, Chelaxians, Kapesh, and technically Osirians didn't say no to this when the state of Aradin was declared this, and but slaves of Osirians rose up and demanded reforms. I'm going to blow my nose for a second, so I will pause. So this is where things were very bad, though. Because the thing is, the slave revolts would have had caused a lot of problems, of course. And getting rid of them directly would also cause a lot of problems because they were part of the economic system that was in place. You couldn't just get rid of them very easily. Granted, you probably could. I'm not saying you couldn't, but just the way that the entire nation was. Consider that, like, the South went through some crap after the Civil War. There probably could have been a better way of doing about things and things like that, that it would have been, cold turkey isn't the best bet for the people that are there, yes. But there has to be something to make up for the loss of economic power and stuff, and it's a mess when you free people from slavery. It really is. It's a horrible system. We're all glad it's gone here on Earth. For the most part. That's a different discussion. But in general, institutional slavery is gone, and that's good. But the phasing out of it has always been a difficult thing for a lot of places in the world, and the ways that it went through a lot of shit. The nation here of Osirion was worried about the same thing. That's when Kemet III instituted the laws of equitable use in 4679. What did they do? The first thing is the law abolished hereditary slavery. What's that? If I'm born to parents that were slaves, I'm not a slave. That's hereditary slavery. So, effectively, we've just changed it that the generations are disappearing. It established guidelines in which the government could place someone in slavery as punishment for criminal activity. So, that's a change now. So now criminals become slaves. Prohibited the harsh mistreatment of slaves, killing, or marrying them against their wills. And it chartered this Council of Liberated Slaves. So, these were big things. Does this get rid of it? No. But the slave rebellions were kind of ended, order was restored. There are still slaves in Osirion now, but when it comes to this level of it, since nowadays the most new slaves that come from Osirion are criminals. Criminal slavery, not great, but at least, steps in the right process. The country's evolving, good for them, still has a lot of issues. We can judge them harshly as all we want, but it's just the way the nation works. So, this is a difficult topic. And one that kind of, you'd address in a world that is a more ancient world like this one. Golarion as a world is very Renaissance. Guess what was still around during the Renaissance on Earth? Slavery. Probably a lot more than it is in Golarion, honestly. Because, 50 years ago, there was a big thing that basically most civilized nations in the world abolished it. So, anyway, but Chelix is just lawful evil anyway, so they're kind of terrible, and Kapesh just has its own issues. Those are discussions for other days. Talking about Chelix is going to be a hard one. I will talk about it one day. So there has been a lot of economic growth, of course, military growth, which the military is technically under the Ruby Prince. And, that's where we come about. So, the Scorpion Coast is, anyway. Basically, the Kalashites are about a fifth of the populations of humans that are there, despite that 3,000 years of rule. So still, the majority of people here are ethnic Osirians, with a few other smaller communities here and there. Okay. There is also one other ancestry here that is to point out. A sizable population of native Famet dwarfs, who are desert dwarfs. They live in small communities outside major metropolitan centers, keep to themselves. There have been a number of halflings who've lived in its nation since the founding. Of course, halflings live with humans a lot. Unfortunately, they were often sought after as domestic servants / slaves. Many of them are still in that position today. Again, better off now. Changes. Changes for the better for Osirion. Are they all the way there? Hell no. But they're getting better. So, other notable members of the government. We can note that there is a number of advisors to Kemet. There's Nazmi, a celestial Gyno-Sphinx and servitor of Abadar, advisor of the prince. There's also Janhelia, an invisible fire elemental that's companion to the prince, who connects with one of his magical items, the Ruby Circlet, and telepathically communicates with him. And it's basically Janhelia has an ancient pact with the prince's ancestors. And she's a fire elemental that is invisibility. And is technically female, which, again, elementals with gender, that's what... I think they decide that on their own. Because I don't know if they're born with a gender. I'm curious about that, because elementals are yeah. They're just beings made of fire. Good for her. Anyway. So, yes. That is all of that, which is the government. Let's talk the geography of Osirion to kind of end for today. We've talked about its people. We now know a lot about its people. Geography will hit both its cities, which will hit a bit about the places and a lot of locations you go to. I'm going to tell you what Osirion mainly is. Desert. It's the northeast corner of Garund. The north is the Inner Sea. The east is the Obari Ocean. I've talked about both of those in my Golarion World episode. To the western border is the Jurenia River, which basically establishes a barrier between Osirion and Thuvia. To the south are two sets of mountains, the Barrier Wall, which leads deeper into the Mwangi Expanse, and the Brazen Peaks. Brazen Peaks, crossing over that, would lead to Capadesh, which again was a former holding of the Osirion Empire. There's the Kaureme Rarne Pass, which leads to the Mwangi Expanse between these two mountain ranges. So there is a little pass between them that leads to Mwangi Expanse. No one really rules the Mwangi Expanse. You don't really have to worry about invading Empire, because it turns out because of that. The Sphinx River, of course, is the most major of all the rivers, with its two tributaries, the Asp and the Crook. Let's talk about some of these areas, and I'm going to be using the regions here. So, the Brazen Frontier. We'll talk about that one first, of the various regions of Osirion here. That, of course, is in the south there. The thing about the Brazen Frontier is we're going to call back to another episode that I've done before then, which has been out on the channel. My episode on ancestries in Golarion, I talked about playing a gnoll. Guess where some of those other gnolls come from? Yes, this is the gnoll-infested borderlands, where not the jungle gnolls of the Mwangi Expanse, which have their issues but are playable, but the slaver demon-worshipping gnolls exist here. I mean, the bad gnolls. The gnolls that you don't get to play, because they are very, demon-worshipy and terrible. So, yes, that's the Brazen Frontier down here. it's a natural border between Osirion and Capadesh, and it is just a, get some runoff from these places as the main source of both the Asp and the Crook rivers, which eventually become the Sphinx River. So this is where a lot of water comes from. And there is a major city here, Peck. It's the only major settlement in the entire area. So, there are a number of things here in the Brazen Frontier to be talking about. The Bone Garden, which is basically a place for the gnolls. The Crook River is one of the two major tributaries, starts from here. There are a number of dead villages, which are basically death worshippers. Erikurus, which is the Famine Dwarfs, one of their larger settlements, built into the Brazen Peaks on the border with Kepesh. So it also houses an extensive necropolis in Osirion. So that's an important part about it. So a number of pharaohs were buried there. The eyes of the Bronze Man are a number of peaks here, and these areas are known for the bronze working and the mines that are there. Of course, there is also another knoll area with Fort Fang, one of the basically only permanent settlements of these nomadic raiding gnolls, with a self-styled Gnoll Pharaoh of Fangs in rule of it. And of course, then there is Apek, which I said, which is a small city. Humans, halflings, dwarfs, and a number of others. It's got its stats in the Legacy of Pharaohs book if you want to look up its stats for using it as a city. It's on the southern banks of the Crook River. And yeah, so it's got 9 districts. And the districts are kind of almost their own governments unto themselves, but the entire city is overseen by a Grundi governor who appoints a council that kind of also rules over it and governs over this region. Apek technically being a capital of the region. Of course, in this region is the Korane Pass, the one I talked about, which is a navigable route to the Mwangi Expanse if you wanted to travel deeper into the deserts of there. And Mount Osiki is the tallest mountain in the Brazen Peaks. And Otep, the Open City, is basically a trade city with the Paramount Dwarfs that is opened up. Can't forget, here has there's a lot of pyramids in Osirion, but nobody forgets the Pyramid of Doom, which is here. It's a monument of modest proportions that looks like from looks outside like the tomb of some third-rate vizier, but turns out a lot of it is not seen, kind of underground, and many people run screaming of there. There's also the Ravenous Sphinx, which is not like the actual creature Sphinx because they're real in this world, but like one of the Sphinx, like the Egyptian Sphinx. It's half buried in the sands of Wati, a jet black crouching lion, sorry, toppled the sneering head of some fantastical beast. Got Trapfield Chamber there too. All right. Hey, remember those slave trenches of Hakotep? Here's where they were. It's a sprawling collection of earthenwork near the northeast of the Korane Pass, headwaters of the Crook. They're named for the mounds, ridges, and berms that kept up them, and it kind of is filled with thousands of bones, presumably the remains of the slaves of Hakop the First. You know why he built these earthenworks and then tossed his dead slaves into it? Not really many people know, but there's maybe the Amber Chronograph is an artifact that kind of connects with it. If you want to know more about that, it probably relates to stuff. I'm just going to go out on a limb here, dealing with Hakop the First, guess what, you fight him in a book. So probably deal with that a lot more. It's a grand place to have a name of it. Let's talk about the footprints of Rovagug, another location here. So now we've talked about that. The footprints of Rovagug, which is in the southwestern corner of here. One of the other two big regions in this area. And it's a swath of rocky badlands in the southwestern corner. It's bordered by the Scarab Rivers in the north, the parched dunes to the west. It's kind of known for this, and monsters doing it. Temples and tombs were attempted to be kind of made here, but earthquakes, volcanic ashes, and a lot of horrible things happened here and kind of drove a lot of things out. You know, it's not a great place to live. Two of Osirion's active volcanoes are found here, and oftentimes blanket the area in rich geothermal activity. In fact, the footprints themselves are that, geothermal results. There's also hot springs, mineral resources. It's an interesting place that, you know, occasional tourists, miners, and explorers go to. Nobody else really enters the footprints. You know, there's a lot of good minerals if you're willing to be a miner there and face the various monsters, beasts, and other dangerous things that are there. Not a great part. There are a number of mines here for copper and iron that are very good. There are two volcanoes here, including Asaluk's Mouth, which is named for the ancient red dragon that lives there, of course. Because, of course, a red dragon lives in the volcano. The Degenig, which is a kind of great pools of mineral spring water that are kind of near the head of the Crook River. The footprints of Rovagug themselves, which the region is named from, are a thing. It's not just called that, there is an actual area, and they are hardened lava flows that are hundreds of feet of cloth, millennia long, and they're scattered throughout the region. They kind of look like the track of a colossal three-toed beast. They're footprints. You know, they're like ancient lava flows that have been brought up. Rovagug cultist believes there is some sacred monstrosity trawled the earth there. Though, again, Rovagug doesn't really have an organized religion nowadays because most people are mad that worship him. But you might find that like there's like a mad hermit that rules over one of these, you know, and some of these get enough worshippers to form a small cult and things like that. They're there, technically. So, yeah. The ruined city of Akabet is here, in this region, and it's known by Sphinx residences as Growlor Oat. And, again, it's a ruined city. Magical sentinels work with tandem of Sphinx to protect the ancient ruins. A Koalar Fountain is a long extinct volcano that is kind of bowl-shaped, depressed, and filled with rainwater that hasn't never quite evaporated. So it's a big old bowl in a volcano. Of course, there's the Scarab River, which we mentioned, and the other active vacanum, Sokar's Boil. Asaluk's Mouth and Sokar's Boil. Sokar's Boil hasn't erupted for thousands of years. It's a little less active than Asaluk's Mouth. But it's not really dormant. It certainly can be told that it is active. It just hasn't erupted for some time. And there is one village in this area. The center of Irori's faith in Osirion is Tarakuta, on a tall peak in the Barrier Wall Mountains. So it's very far from civilization. It's a monastery. So technically it's in the Barrier Wall Mountains, though this is also considered part of, you know, the Footprints region. So if you were to visit it, it's a thing. Then, of course, we have the main Osirion Desert. Basically, a lot more of this territory. it's the bulk of the land here. It's desert. You know, there isn't much to say about this entire region because a lot of the fertility in Osirion is in the Sphinx Basin and the that entire region to the east, and the Scorpion Coast. So, you know, it's a desert. It's very inhospitable. It's sparsely populated because there isn't a lot of great places. It's very anti-human life at very least. There are things there to explore. So, yeah, might want to check it out yourself. The Alamanen Peninsula is the northern part of this entire thing in Osirion. It's a defensive point for that area up there with a number of monks of Dejfar, kind of looking over at the Tower of Dejfar. It's a defensive point for that area. That's a name that is really kind of hard to do. The Coast of Graves is a area along the shore here where a lot of ships have basically run aground because it's a difficult route along the thing where a lot of rocky shoals, difficult to spot places, very easy to kind of crash and die there. There's the Desert Mouth, a giant hole, strangely enough, in the region. Ito, just north of the Pillars of the Sun, it's basically a small city. And it's the... can you see it on the map there? Kind of in the center, above the Pillars of the Sun, the mountain range that's in the middle of the area there. It's the trade hub for anything that's passing through this region here. If you are going to be heading into the deserts of Osirion, honestly, you're probably going to travel through here, and you travel across it. Caravans that cross the desert start here, basically, or end here, depending on the direction you're coming into. So it is a very important place in the set of everything here. I'm going to blow my nose again. Oh, that's turning that off, not muting. Alright. The Glazing Sheets are basically a desert southwest of Shimisen Shet, where it's a series of broken glass mesas and plains, shattered to fine granules and consisted of end-ending mirrored sheet plains. Something happens that glassed the desert here. You know. Gozerian Necropolis is a nice place to visit. No. Based around the massive Pyramid of Masks. Lost Kingdom talks about that, and it's, if you want to learn more about it, check out the campaign settings, Lost Kingdoms, for this. Pyramid of Masks is a thing. There is the lighthouse of Hor Aha, which is beyond the Coast of Graves, which is the major lighthouse in the region. The Junaria River, which I talked about, which forms the western border between the two, between this and Thuvia. Oh, God, what other good places? There's a number of lost areas here. The Parchment Dunes, Pillars of the Sun, the Lost, Lamashtu's Flower, not a great place to visit, Temple of Lamashtu, Lost Fortress of Melakesh, Lost Mines of Siwa, Lair of the Crystal King. I can name a lot of these things. They're really neat. Ruins of El Amara. As much as I could talk about the other ones, I could just mention all these places, and they're just interesting to hear about, just their names alone. The Suhuri Wastes. Not a pleasant place to go to. Of course, it's a wasteland. Oh, actually, no. I'm sorry. The Suhuri Wastes. It's the opposite. Oh, God. It's hilarious. In comparison to the rest of the desert, it's positively lush. So, it's a lot of succulents and cacti. And no animals live here, though, because the plants are poisonous, is what's assumed. So, yeah, botanists visit this areas, and people getting poisons, but no animals live there, because everything is poisonous. Another major city here, it's one of the oldest extant cities, coming from -3707, made by the Song Pharaoh, another one I didn't mention, but during that time period, is Shimasan Sekh, which is S-E-K-H. Again, butchering these names. So this is another small city. It's in this region. It is kind of in the mid-center of the area there, too. So towards the northern part of the Osirion Desert, another big city. So probably on your trade route, you'd probably pass through here. It is on the Golden Oasis. It has water. Good for it. The Sphinx head, the Black Sphinx, is buried up to its chin in the sands of the desert, and you can explore it. It's the burial chamber of Mendes the First, the Sky Pharaoh. A couple more places. Tremor Valley, which is pleasant. And, yeah, let's talk about the Scorpion Coast. The last two areas there. Noble settlements here, of course, and Alakar, El Sheladan, Gardens of Shpeska, and Mount Naken. The latter two which don't have a lot of people there, but are settlements. The other two which are a small kind of town and a big city. I can tell you the major races here. I forgot there was a little bit more information on these different regions. That's so nice. Yeah, the Brazen Frontier, dwarves, gnolls, and humans. Yeah, you know, that makes sense. Footprints of Rovagug, Mephits, dwarfs, and humans. Still makes sense. The few bit of humans there, the dwarfs, the desert dwarfs still living there. The Osirion Desert, Orans, oh, that's the language. Desert giants, elementals, Girthabilius, gnolls, humans, Mephetists. Oh God, I'm butchering these names so much. I gotta apologize for that. I butcher some names on purpose, but these are not. Andrew Sphinx's desert giants, elementals, Girtabilius's humans in the Scorpion Coast here. So it's in eastern Osirion. It's kind of a little bit of a wasteland here too. Sifting sands, dunes, ancient wonders. The coastline doesn't make it better. It's got a lot of desert winds and, warring elemental clans in this area. So yeah, that's a thing about it. Warring elemental clans described it. It's not for the faint of heart. A few modern settlements, a lot of ancient ruins, strange arcane and divine powers. It's a place to go visit. Anen Selotota, a mysterious pyramid located near the ruins of Thuman, is one of the places there. And Alakat, which I said is a relatively isolated community. Which, do I have it on the map here? The Temple of An Alakat in the south, below the Shining Mountains. I do have it on the map here. It's mostly a trading post. A temple to An Alak. The Temple of An Alak is devoted worships to Irori. There is the Andros Sphinxes of Zabuki, which is Sphinx statues in an area. The Asps in here, remember the Blizzard. The Burning Cape, just as a great name for there. Of course, El Shelalad. So, the thing about this place is this was a place built to house the slaves that built Thuman. That's what El Sheladad is. It now is a city of political struggles, racial tension, but it was a basically slave city, is what it was built for. And it housed only a small fraction of those that built Thuman originally, but it is a major area there too. There are a lot of people in this city which would rather see fealty back to the Palish Empire of Kelish across the sea. But though still the city's roots are very Osirion. It's just that the Kelishites have a much bigger influence in this city than a lot of area. A lot of Kelishites, remember, only a fifth of the country is Kelish. there's a very large amount of it here. So, it's a city that is, got its issues, unfortunately, because of that. Got its issues. Mount Naken, high in the Shining Mountains, is a isolated, sparse temple. The Salt Hills, barren badlands in Osirion of a dried up sea during the Age of Creation. Of course, the Shining Mountains themselves, towering peaks that rise unexpectedly from the Sorpi's cult's sands, home to a lot of mythical creatures. Best known is Paishinia, a female griffin with feathers colored tarnished gold. Whew. I'm gonna blow my nose again. Sorry, catching my breath a little bit here too, because we're going through a lot, and I'm trying to. This is the part that I knew was going to be the hardest for me to go through. I wanted to go through the geography well, and it's a 68-page book. I'm doing my best to give you the best summary from. Rules books are a lot easier to do this with, rather than books that give details on locations. Shodapkara was a military and commercial hub connecting Thuman and the Obari Ocean. There are still some hermits that live there. Not a lot. Of course, there's Thuman. It was the second capital. Remember when it was kind of moved? The Pharaohs before Ascension moved to Thuman. Yeah, good old Thuman. There's mysterious magics that purified water for the citizens and things like that. It's a lost city. And so if you want to look up more about Thuman, it is in the Pathfinder campaign setting Lost Cities of Golarion. I probably have that book. I might have that book. I might not. I'd have to check on that one. I certainly have this one. So basically, Thuman's water disappeared. Its peoples abandoned the city. And basically, there are those that keep trying to excavate it from it falling to the winds and stuff, and the warring elementals from like burying it in their stuff. The Underdunes are, of course, enormous trenches and mountains of sand, where a lot of these like elemental battles go about. And of course, there's the Valley of Pyramids in this area. A large grouping of long-forgotten pyramids. Kind of since from before the reign of the Pharaohs of Ascensions in the Second Age. There are 4 pyramids in a square formation within the vast complex of pyramids that seem to be the most unusual one. Their true purpose is anchors for extra-dimensional pyramid that houses the 4 pharaohs' tombs, the Veinstone Pyramid. Hey, you know those 4 pharaohs of Ascension? Not seen since the 4. Basically, these pyramids popped up around the birth of the Second Age. Oh, and Entombed with the Pharaohs module will detail some of this. Cool. Now we have to talk about, of course, good old Sothis, which I have an image of Sothis, don't I? I think I do. I can switch to an image of Sothis. I did that one, and that one. We can go back to good old... it's not a great image of Sothis. We saw the image of Sothis earlier. Good old Sothis. Yeah. So it's a metropolis. It has over 100,000 people, most of which, of course, is humans, about 87,000, about 6,000 dwarfs, about 5,000 halflings, 3,000 elves, 2,000 gnomes, 2,000 half-elves, 1.5 thousand geniekins, 1,000 half-orcs, and about 3,000 other. It's a lawful, neutral city, to say the least. It's within the Sphinx Basin. It is built... is a dozen miles of the Sphinx River built into that area on the eastern deserts of Osirion. It was dependent on oases of water until the construction of the Crimson Canal. It has a large number of districts. The Uroda, the Brazen Pool, the Canal District, Crimson Isle, Grand Oasis, Marble Court, Newstone, Old City, Old Stone, The Palms, Peacock Square, Rose Quarter, Scorpion Road, Sphinx Side, Streets of Artisans, and Triangle Gate. The 16 major districts, which incorporate many smaller neighborhoods and has allotted, it's a metropolis. It's kind of hard to talk about that in a way that, So one of the things is, yes, halflings had it really bad, but especially in modern day Sothis, it is a little better off. Oh, is that oh, that's the one I started with. I can just do this again. We can just do this again. There we go. Yeah, cool. Did it quickly and finish. The streets of Sothis. Certainly, halflings nowadays. One of the main settlements of halflings in the inner sea regions are here, and they do perform an important part of Osirian society. Again, still some are slaves, many are laborers, many are artisans. But the thing is, those days have changed a little bit. The main thing is, the Osirians believe halflings emanate luck. So including them in their business, whether hiring them on as whatever from that list happens, yeah. The High Temple of Pharasma and the Acropolis of the Faithful are all here. There's Grand Temples of Nethys, the Agazaran Spire, Temple of the Eternal Sun. The Eye of Sothis is here. And there's a small temple to the south end of Mathrazu Bazaar, to some stuff here. The temples of Nethys have been built and destroyed many times. Nethys, the magic deity, has a relationship with the place here. So, big old bug corpse in the middle of the town. I'm not going to go into the 16 districts. If you want to know about it more, you can either look it up online for a little bit of information, or for deep dives, again, I recommend Osirion Legacy of the Pharaohs. It's a great book for a deep dive if you're going to use Osirion stuff and not one of the pre-made adventures. So, there you go. Again, I've mentioned a lot of the major things in this area, and let me just check if there's anything else I need to mention. No, that looks about that I got everyone else, and we can move on to the last region then. If we're talking about regions, and that's the Sphinx Basin, which has pretty much, that's where Sothis is, and all the other big cities. There's humans, lizard folk, Shantians, and water elementals that make up the major races in this area. Yes, water elementals. So, this is the area of the country that's been occupied since before written history. It's a fertile land, mild climate, and it provided shelter for the isolated tribes after Earthfall turned the northern Garund into a desert. Turns out, northern Garund wasn't always a desert. Earthfall caused that. Yay, apocalypse, and so basically a lot of people moved into this area here. And then Olirant happened, and, that entire thing happened, and civilization developed here. So the Sphinx Basin is basically on the river Sphinx, and is the heart, which is the largest river, among the largest rivers in Grund, and it's the heart of Osirian everything. There are a number of sister cities of Sothis in here, and Tepu, Wati, where they have just much smaller populations also. Torta, Kali, Dejfit, I can never pronounce any of these. And known as the City of Triangles, is known for its symmetry and prominence of the shining mountains to the northeast. Got some pyramids and stuff in the area. It is also a metropolis, but a much smaller one. Good to know. Dejfit is the village of Ashen Curse. Yeah. It looks on the surface like any other place there, but it's under an ancient curse. Anyone that lives there turns ashen color when they enter adulthood. Yeah. Yeah. It causes ash colors when they enter adulthood, wrinkle, and withering away prematurely. Yeah, the village doesn't have a huge population, and many of them are very young. Anyway. The Hungry Sepulchre is there. That's a pleasant-sounding place. Khalit, the Village of Stories, on the River Sphinx. And the thing is, it has, in general, though it's very unexceptional. It's just like a normal village. The thing about it is, every time someone comes through there, a trainer comes through there, the village elders interview them about their lives, and, you know, it's very rare that a traveler doesn't spell their stories. And the thing is, these elders keep these stories. And then once every decade, any stories that are deemed important or special are committed to papyrus. So it has the most extensive idiosyncratic history of Osirion and other lands in the inner sea, told via countless life stories. So that's something interesting about Khalit, the Village of Stories. Because sort of like, the elders will listen to the stories of travelers, remember these stories, and then once a decade, they'll be like, what stories have we heard this time which we think should be passed down to paper? Oh, Jimmy's got a great story, let's pass it down. And then they write down Jimmy's story. The prison barge of Apatula is in this region. Lord Garshus was captured by Mendes the 20th, you know, which is a powerful being held there. Plenty of other prisoners that are too dangerous to kill are put there. Basically, the prison barge is a place where any being that's too difficult or dangerous to kill is basically imprisoned, and it has survived 3,000 years because no one wants to free the prisoners. Yeah. I don't know more about Lord Garricus. Let's look up Lord Garricus. I don't know about Lord Garricus Pathfinder. That's the one I don't know. Lord Garricus Pathfinder. I didn't spell his name right. Garricus. I missed that. Garricus Pathfinder. Oceatin. Which is a type of genie. Oh, it's a powerful genie that's been improvised. Oh. Ha! Gotcha. Man, he was in prison for sucky things. The Pharaoh Mendes the 20th, he boasted that no prison could hold him with the friendship of the spirits of the earth. Man. So only the barge crew, which is this, like, secretive order of guards that has existed over to it, and the Ruby Prince knows who's on board. That's an interesting thing to have. Yeah. The River Sphinx is, it's a river, but it's also got black-scaled crocodilians that are enormous to size, hippopotamus, reed vipers, carnivorous fish, giant insects, predator waterfowl, you know, bandits in the desolate stretches of the river. The River Sphinx is not a great place overall. And the Sphinx Delta at the surface of it, you know, it's the delta at the end of it. Tephu, City of the Reed People. Hey, Blaze. Another city that you can check out. Torta. Yeah, I mean, that's what happened. I'll bribe some water. I've been drinking iced tea. Water might help, too. I do love the no prison can hold me. Be imprisoned for like 3,000 years. He's still there, theoretically. Torta is the second largest port after Sothis, with a natural harbor surrounded by highlands. Another metropolis, probably the second biggest city in there with 50,000 people. A lot of olive groves there. The original city is known as Old City, and there's a wall that separates it from the newer city. And of course, Wati, the half city, a legacy of a terrible Lomashusan plague that ravaged it hundreds of years ago, killing half the population. It was abandoned, then reclaimed by the Church of Pharasma, whose temple is in the most civic town. Half the original city is still dead, crawling in a ruinous area with desert creatures and kind of stuff. But the living part of Wadi has now expanded since the Church of Pharasma basically reclaimed it. It's still a pretty depressing and macabre place since, like, you know... it's like, well, you know, it's a desert city still, so it's sort of like you've got the nice part of the city, and then you've got the horrible dead part of the city sprawling with, you know, those that have been killed by plague risen as dead, the wrath of the living, you know, horrible desert monsters that moved in. You know, Wati, great place to visit. There is, you visited one of the adventure paths, I'm guessing Mummy Mask. 79 is that Mummy's Mask? Probably. So, I think that's about it for the Legacy of Pharaohs. Not in that book. I can close that book, leave the map open here, as I think we give our outro for stuff here, because we've kind of hit on all the marks for everything here. I can kind of cut that down. I hope this has been enough for you to get an idea of what's in Osirion. Its history, a lot of locations you could visit, and honestly, there's a lot of cool locations that you could make adventures for. A lot of adventure paths, small adventures, and books have detailed some of these places for you to visit. But honestly, if you just wanted to, you can make up a tomb or a pyramid or a ruins very easily here and make it on your own. There's plenty that is probably unexplored and unmade. It's a country of both rich history and adventure. And certainly it's a country that marks very well the evolution of Golarion as a world. Golarion has become much more of a free world than it was centuries ago, even. Similar to our own world, where if we look back a century, we were much less a free world, though they don't have the technology we have. Socially, they have developed much stronger than our world, I would say, even. Socially, they had this basically social renaissance more than a technological renaissance. Perhaps magic has stifled technological development because it's a crutch. Certainly the parts of the world where things like gunpowder and guns have come about. But Osirion is that kind of mark between the old and new, where the new is slowly preaching in. But this nation, which was under dominance from another very powerful nation across an ocean, lasting thousands of years of its history, has now only recently gotten back on its own feet and become its own thing, reclaiming its ancient past. And dealing with that, plus dealing with this new world order that's coming about, is where Osirians is. So yes, the Osirians are still a slave nation. Will it last? Honestly, it's probably something that will mostly phase out. Criminal slavery will probably be a thing for generations to come in Osirion. But with hereditary slavery gone, honestly, might change. Though with other slave nations, certainly people could be brought into the country. So, there's a lot to say here. The world of Golarion is changing, and we are, as players in it, who join with it in its history, are in the cusps of this changing, of this, as I said, social renaissance, which this country represents very heavily. I've talked about Ustalov, I've talked about Druma, as my previous 2 episodes before this one, if you want to go check them out. Those countries have unique histories, but those countries are very young in comparison, and mark much more tumultuous time periods dealing with a lot of different things. In a way, they also have their old histories. Not nearly as much as the Osirians, but their existence as countries are marked much more adaptation to this newer way of life, with their own terrible things going on in their countries which mark their histories. An evolution of the world is not seen the same way as it is here, where you can see the mixtures between new and old. And another connection to Earth is here, with the same deities that we know as the Egyptian deities were worshipped here in Osirion. Once Osirion lost a lot of strength, they left and visited our ancestors in Egypt. That's the way it went. And maybe you too, if you want to travel from modern-day Golarion in the game as we play it to Earth, you can go visit 1928 and enjoy it. Another new fact that, connects things together and makes it really interesting. As I said, check out the books I mentioned. The other thing that I could mention is, if you just want some general, a lot of the information I did go over here is, of course, up on the Pathfinder wiki. It's a great place to talk about some of this stuff, kind of summarized down. If you want more in-depth, certainly go check out the books I mentioned. But just for the basics of the information, if you want to review it yourself, that's a great place to go to. So I'm going to get going. This actually ended up being a pretty long video. I didn't know this was going to be this long until I honestly did the research from this when I decided to do this earlier in the week. So, hey, I hope everybody has a great day, relaxes, enjoys yourself, and learned a few things about the depths of Osirian culture. And until the next time, I bid all of you farewell.